The next session is, just look at the history, because when we talk about some of this, about who we're talking with, the nation is in the wintertime. We're dying off. Institutions are dying off. If you have paid any attention to the political scene, I'll be honest with you, whether you like President Trump or not, or whether you like President Obama or not, President Trump, he is 70, 72, right in there, okay? So he's over here, he's an elder, he's a boomer, he's no dummy. I'll be honest, he's doing stuff over here, meanwhile he's doing stuff over there. Everybody's looking over here, Twitter. And he's putting conservative judges on the benches left and right. Nobody's paying attention to. Okay? I was watching Fox, the business news channel, and they were talking about the markets, and it crested 23,000 first time. And I'll be honest with you, if you understand this cycle stuff, you ought to go look at the economic cycle. That 23K can go to zero overnight. It's a false safety number. Doesn't mean the business is closed down. It can just all go away because it's on a cycle. 08 was a correction in the real estate cycle. Okay? The dot-commers, when was that, 01, 02? When that one fell apart, somewhere in there, where the dot-com. But you know what the dot-coms, you know who they impacted? Wasn't the Dow, it was the NASDAQ. It was a smaller group. But what did it do? It corrected itself. When President Bush said GM is too big to fail, we got to bail her out, that was one of the worst economic decisions. Because at the time, we had bankruptcy laws that would have allowed General Motors to do what General Motors needed to do to stay in business. You know how you know that? Look at the airlines, Delta. Every other year, what are they filing? Bankruptcy. See? So let GM go the legal route. We have those laws on the books. You know, everybody gives President Trump a hard time about filing bankruptcy. I loved his answer. It was the law. I was allowed to do it. Well, as a businessman, why wouldn't you do it? Okay, don't get mad at him. Get mad at the guy that wrote the law. See? So they're economically, we're spinning over here, by the way. While the country's dying, economically, we're over here. So what's coming? The market will fix itself. It will correct itself. And when that happens, then the market will be here, and the country is over here going, whoa, what happened here? See? Because the economic cycle isn't 100 years. It's a 20-year cycle. It's a shorter cycle, because it's the economics in the moment. When you think about the politicians and the political stuff, that's all on cycles. How many of you have heard of the death to the Republican Party's coming, death to the Democrats coming? We need a third party. I'm reading a book right now called The War of the Presidents, which goes back to the time of the Civil War and the presidents leading up to Abraham Lincoln, and the fact that they kicked that 1822 number, they kicked the Civil War to Abraham Lincoln politically. They didn't want to deal with it. They kept shelving the freelanders. They kept shelving the free states, the slave states. They kept shelving all that. We'll deal with it next year. And they got pushing it. In one of the elections of the president, there were 6 different parties in Congress at that time. The Whigs, the Freelanders, the slave state. It's just, I'm like, 6 of them. Now, a couple of the parties only had 2 or 3 members, you know, a little different, and they had to, everything was done by mail and horseback and telegraph, you know. And I'm sitting there going, my goodness, if people understood the history of some of this, they would just move on anyway. None of that's in this, but the thing of it is if you grasp the fact that we're on cycles, when you get to looking at who you're talking to, if you talk to someone who's an elder who right now is in their maybe their 90s, a senior elder, they begin to remember stuff about the Depression. They were born then, see. You know, yeah, it always was fascinating to me when my grandparents, everything was covered in tin foil. When we did Grandma Gordon's place, tin foil. Spoons wrapped in tin foil. And I'm like, what is all of this about? They didn't waste anything. They kept everything. Why? They lived on the farm. And what did you do on the farm when a tractor broke or you replaced a tractor? You never got rid of the old because you might need a part. And it became the part bin, see? Why? Because they had a different mentality. Today, when my tablet breaks, I throw it away and go get another one. They didn't think that way. So they think differently. So when we talk about the history of this, I don't want to bore you with it, but I want you to kind of understand, especially when we talk about the spiritual stuff. The colonial, the Puritan generation, I wrote that up there, 1584 to 1614. When you talk about these guys, and just some history, okay? The Puritan generation ran from 1584 to 1614. It was mostly over all of this would be over in Europe, basically. But here are some of the big names, if you will, from that generation. Miles Standish. It's a big name. Some of you older folks, you younger guys, write it down, go look him up. John Withrop. Anne Hutchinson. Roger Williams. There's Roger's Rangers. That's who he is. Sir William Berkeley. John Withrop Jr. Jr. got in. John Harvard. He's the guy that started Harvard University. He would definitely roll over in his grave if he saw his university today. Harvard and Yale and Oxford were all preacher colleges. That's how they started. Puritan preacher colleges designed to do nothing but produce preachers. And look at the mess they're in today. Some historical events. In 1588, England defeats the Spanish Armada. Remember that? Little England. Spain's got this big armada. Now, if you're a Calvinist, you would say that the providence of God moved that dust, that fog in and saved, because Spain was a Catholic country and England was a Protestant country, and God's on the side of the Protestants, so He blew that bad boy in there. So see, now that's if you were a Calvinist, okay? The death of Queen Elizabeth happens, 1603. You've got the Pilgrims, 1620. They land at Plymouth Rock. 1622, you have the massacre of Jamestown by the Indians. 1638, Anne Hutchinson is tried and banished for heresy. She's a neat lady. You ought to read about her sometime. Charles I is executed in 1649. 1689, the Glorious Revolution in America. So you begin the colonial cycle, and you begin to deal with these generations. So these older folks, the generations earlier, they come along, and it's kind of like, okay, you know, they're going on and on and on. The revolution, what did I skip? Did I skip one? The colonial cycle. You guys understand that? Let me see something here. The colonial cycle, again, you've got different things happening through, you've got the revolution in America in 1689. Then you have King William's War. Again, that's over. That's against the French Canadian. Canada begins. So now you're up in the Northwest, in the Midwest. You got a big war going on. You got Queen Anne's War. That's over in Europe. So you got things going on. This country is just what? Beginning. We're just going. You come into the revolutionary cycle. In that cycle, you begin to have Benjamin Franklin, 1706 is born. You begin to have George Whitefield, great preacher. Boy, some good stuff. Now, again, doctrinally you go, but that's us now, see, with our understanding. But you know what that man preached? You're a sinner. Christ died for you. You need Him. Faith alone. That's pretty much all he preached. You know, it's just fascinating when you go back and read some of these guys. They didn't have Paul distinctive ministry and understanding the dispensational stuff down like you and I do. They had some of it. The book's the book. You read it and study it. Guess what you're going to find out? There's an Israel section and a body of Christ section. That's just by reading it. And I'm not saying they didn't have that, but it's not like we got those steps there. You had William Livingston, Franklin, Sherman, and Livingston attend the Constitutional Convention. These guys are key players in, that was in 1787. 1790, Benjamin Franklin dies. Then you have in 93, you have Samuel Hopkins publishes the doctrines contained in divine revelation. So you've got this movement going on socially and spiritually, these awakenings. You come across through there, Benedict Arnold, he's there. George Washington is there, Paul Revere. You got Robert Rogers. You got all these guys that historically you begin to see and to hear. You come into the Civil War, and you come into that cycle, and you begin to have, you got like Uncle Tom's Cabin is written, so now you got that fabric thing going on in the way the world looks. You've got the Manifest Destiny, where you have the Spanish-American War, and that gets defeated, and you got the women's rights movements and the beginning of the civil rights stuff and so forth in the late 1800s. You got the Civil War, obviously. You got all these different things going on that begins to happen. Now, I did all that quickly because we're here. These are the people we're talking to now in the great power cycle. And these are going to be more folks where we begin to talk with as they get later in life and as they begin to head towards the deathbed, if you will, the cemetery. But then they also have produced children and other generations and grandchildren and great-grandchildren that we begin to influence. When you come to the boomer generation, he's got 1943 to 1960. So again, you can play that number gets played a little bit. The big names out of the boomer generation. The first one listed is Oliver North. Do you remember him? Yeah. If you don't, go turn on the History Channel or the Fox News Channel on some evening late or on the weekends, and Oliver North goes through history, military history. I think it might be the History Channel he's on. And it's just fascinating. Sit there and he's talking about it. How about 1946? Donald Trump's born. Steve Martin. How about Joe Namath? Janis Joplin. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Jerry Mathers, the Beaver, the Beav. Yeah, 1948. How about Oprah Winfrey? 1954. Steve Jobs is in 55. William Gates, Bill Gates is in 55. John McEnroe, he made the list. These are just sample members, okay? So when you begin to look at that, historically wise, 1946, Spock publishes the Baby Care book. That start of the post-war baby boom, He's the guy that made the stork famous, was him. By the way, it comes out of the Old Testament, just so you know. Anyway, 1949, the TV age begins. 1 million sets are sold in America in 1949. 54, you have the polio vaccination discovered. You've got Brown versus Brown, the school desegregation issue is decided on the Supreme Court. So what are we beginning to have now? We've got a social events happening, but we also have some spiritual things beginning to happen. A change of the out and a change of the in. Free speech movement at Berkeley, Vietnam War, all that begins 1964. The Apollo moon landing, Woodstock, all that 1969. 1970, great year. I was born that year. But you know what you have? You have Kent State. And you have Jackson State massacres. You have Earth Day introduced. You have days of rage going on. What do we have? We got a secular crisis, but at the same time, we're having a spiritual darkening. We're going the wrong direction. You have McGovern tries to rally the youth vote and loses badly. The draft ends. Nixon and Watergate scandal. 81, you have the start of the Reagan era. The first use of the word yuppie. You got Al Gore in 88, run for president. Dan Quayle is elected vice president. Hey, things you can kind of just connect there with. You come over, that's the boomers. The 13ers, the 13th generation, that's the Gen Xers. That's me. By the way, they give a date of 61 to 81, but you can, again, those are their date. Michael J. Fox is a famous name. Eddie Murphy. John Bon Jovi. Oh, what a guy. Roger Clemens, if you ever watch sports. Tom Cruise. Michael Jordan. Whitney Houston. Brooke Shields. Mike Tyson. Lisa Bonet. Jim Abbott. Mary Lou Retton. Okay. Gary Coleman. What you talking about, Willis? Okay. The U.S. government approves public sale of birth control pills. 1962. The baby boom ends in 65. Supreme Court upholds right to contraceptives. They introduce it, it goes through the legal system, they okay it. Fabric is beginning to do what? Go away. It's changing. You have in 68, Rosemary's Baby begins decade-long popularity of bad child films. That's Chucky. That's where Chucky came from, Rosemary's Baby. Roe v. Wade, abortion case, 1973. 79, U.S. hostages seized in Iran, long lines at the gas pump. By the way, who's the president right there? Jimmy Carter. Yeah. Military enlistment surge, youth vote supports Reagan. 83, a nation at risk. Sharply criticizes students, Grenada invasion happening. School children, 86, you know what happened in 86? The Challenger blew up. And the school children were watching it happen. First time ever. They didn't have the 3-second delay thing that they have today on TV so that they don't harm you with bad images. 89, you have a surge in gang killings. You have the Berlin Wall dismantled. And in 90, you have the troops going to the Persian Gulf, Gulf War I. That's my generation. That lasts till the mid-80s. Then you come over to the millennials right now, starting 82, and they're going to go out. Again, this book was written in 91, so he's going to stop here. It's going to really run out to 2005. His little list, you have some of these names I never knew. I still don't. Hillary Morgan, Dooney Waters, Jebby Bush, but that Baby M. Remember Baby M? Yeah, I do. Class of 2000 is born in 1982. Flurry of books demand protection for children. 83, cute baby movie trend begins. The time before we had the bad babies. Now we got the good babies. Time cover story proclaims the end of the sexual revolution. 85, U.S. becomes debtor nation. Crying baby ads are popular. 87, everybody's baby. Jessica McLaurin rescued. Baby M case. You have a surge in cocooning, celebrity pregnancies, school uniforms, all that's introduced. Webster case in 89 limits Roe v. Wade, anti-drug crusade grows. Now we're having the war on drugs. And the educational goals set for the year 2000, the first Children's Summit at the UN. Do you see in this time frame where the children are now very important? We do it for the children. We're doing this to protect the children. You see that? They ain't doing it to protect nobody, but to do what? Slowly just deteriorate away the information. So when you look at the history and you talk about the history of it, the Gen Zers, they don't have anything on them yet because they're not done. Again, these guys look back and then they plot it out. By the way, one of these gentlemen, House or Strauss, he's dead now. And the other one is still working, but he's got a new collaborator. And the books are, they're okay. They're not of this quality. We're here. The last winter. If you want to understand, come over with me to the book of Acts. If we want to understand about the winter time, Acts 17. I shared this Wednesday night with the folks, and we'll do it here in just a minute. The last winter. By the way, let's do this real quick as you're finding that one. The fall before the last winter, 1825 to 1850. Okay? So we're going to be here. We're going to run this way now with some history. 1828, Andrew Jackson is elected president. 1830, the railroad era begins. I'm working on the railroad. In 34, the Whig Party is formed. You know who the Whig Party becomes? The Republican Party. 1835, Texas is established. The Republic of Texas is established. 46, the Mexican War begins. 48, you've got the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ending the Mexican War. U.S. acquires California, the territory of New Mexico, which includes Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and part of Colorado. What are we doing in this country? We're working and we're moving, we're discovering. That's the fall, before the last winter. In 49, gold is discovered in California. 50, you got the compromise. You got California admitted to the Union. You got all this stuff going on. In 50 to 1875, we're now in the wintertime. We have the Gadsden Purchase happening in 53. That's this territory. That's when the Gadsden Purchase starts about just north of Casa Grande and runs to the border. Gadsden wanted to buy Rocky Point. He wanted Rocky Point in so that the Arizona Territory had a port city. Mexico said no when they were ending the war and drawing it all out. So that's why we don't have Rocky Point as a port. 58, the Lincoln-Douglas debates are going on. 59, John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry happens. 60, Abraham Lincoln is elected 16th President of the United States. That same year, the South, succeeds. 61, Confederate States of America is formed. Civil War begins at Fort Sumner. The North is defeated at the First Battle of Bull Run. It's done. 62, you've got the Battle of Antietam. You got the Emancipation Proclamation issued. 64, you've got Sherman taking Atlanta and then his march to the sea where he burned everything up. 65, you got Lee surrendering at Appomattox Courthouse. You have the 13th Amendment establishing the abolishment of slavery. That's the winter before the last winter. We're 2 winters back. We're at the Civil War. Okay? In 67, Alaska is purchased. In 68, the 14th Amendment guaranteeing civil rights. 70, the 15th Amendment. And then you have all of the mess happening with the South and the carpetbaggers and all that. 1875 to 1900, we're now in the spring, before the last spring. 76, we have the Battle of Little Bighorn. So now we're still trying to control who? The Indians. Okay. In 77, you have Munn versus Illinois. The court rule states may regulate warehouse rates. We're in the Industrial Revolution, so now what's beginning to happen? Child labor laws, the union stuff, all that's beginning to come up. You have the railroad companies. In 1883, I thought this was interesting. In 1883, railroad companies divide nation into 4 time zones. Everybody wants, where did the railroad companies did it? Blame them. Okay? You've got the Sherman antitrust in 90 and so forth. 1898, there's a war with Spain and Hawaii is annexed. 99, we have the peace with Spain. When U.S. receives the Philippines, Guam, Puerto Rico, and Samoa, S-A-M-O-A, Samoa, in that agreement. Bet you didn't know that, did you? Last summer before the last winter, 1900 to 1920. 1900, gold standard is established. 01, Theodore Roosevelt becomes president. 04, Roosevelt establishes the Monroe Doctrine. 04 to 14, Panama Canal is built. 1912, Woodrow Wilson is elected. 1913, the 16th Amendment authorizing income tax is ratified. Didn't have one until then. Now it's the law. 17th Amendment providing direct elections of senators ratified. Federal Reserve System begins. We're here. Everything's growing. Everything's going. We're going good. 1914, World War I begins. U.S. troops are sent to Haiti. The Lusitania is sunk. The KKK is revived. 1915. 1916, Germany issues Sussex Pledge. 17, Russian Revolution. U.S. enters World War I, 1917. 1918, World War I ends with the Treaty of Versailles. 1919, 18th Amendment prohibiting alcoholic beverages. So now we have prohibition. Now what did that do? That was great, wasn't it? Okay. 1920, we have the 19th Amendment giving women the right to vote. The first radio station, KDKA in Pittsburgh, is established. It's here. Now we come to the next winter. The last winter that we go through. If we want to understand the winter we're in, where do we look to? Not fall, not summer. We got to go back to where? The last winter. Here's the last winter. 1921 or 1924, the Revenue Act slashes income tax on wealthy and corporations. 1927, Lindbergh crosses the Atlantic. 1929, the stock market does what? Crashes. It dies. 32, Franklin Roosevelt is elected. 1933, the bank holidays begin. the NRA, the AAA, the FDIC, the TVA, the FERA, and the CCC are all enacted in 1933. You know what they're beginning to see? They're beginning to see things change, die. What does the NRA protect? Second Amendment, right? Rights? What was happening? By the way, coming out of the Civil War, do you know that you could buy acres, pennies, for pennies on the dollar? They had a real estate bubble burst coming out of the Civil War. Because it was Yankee dollars or Confederate dollars. Which one do you got? Well, I got Confederate dollars. They don't mean nothing. We need Yankee dollars now. Why? Who won? The Yankees won. See, World War I, you coming out, you just look up the prices in World War I. It's cheap. That's where we're at. 20th Amendment, changing inauguration day to January is established. 21st Amendment, repealing prohibition. Hitler comes to power in Germany. All that in 1933. 1934, gold standard is terminated. 34. The SEC is established. Well, what happened in 33 or in 29? It all broke up. So now what do we have to have? We have to have government regulation, so guess what? It'll never happen again. We got to protect that. We can't have people jumping out of buildings killing themselves. Come on, don't you know that? And you know what the country said? Yes, we do. Because one of the attributes of winter is institutions die and the collective good is for the betterment of the greater good is established and people go that way. Rather than, wait a minute, what happened in 9/11? After 9/11 happened, do you remember the act that Bush signed, the Congress wrote and so forth, that began called the Patriot Act? Do you realize what that thing actually did? It took away more rights, but how did they push it? We need to be safe. So what does the country do? Instead of saying, wait a minute, let's look at this. What do you mean I'm going to lose this or I'm going to lose that? See? They said, no, we need to be safe. Yes, we need the TSA. Instead of the hysteria, but that's what happens in the wintertime. Cabin fever. Now here we have it in the summertime because it's 180 out for 6 months. But what happens in cabin fever? We got to go. Yeah, we got to go. You get all this ramped up stuff going on. 1935, Social Security Act is established. FDR in 36 is reelected. Japan invades China. That didn't go very well. 38, the U.S. Housing Authority is established. The Fair Labor Standards Act is established. Hitler takes Austria. The Munich Agreement is established. World War II begins in 1939. In 40, Roosevelt makes destroyers for base deal with the British. France falls, and you have the first peacetime draft beginning to happen for the war. That's the last winter. What's going on? Things are doing what? Falling apart. See? Things are coming to a death, but things are being enacted that are going to do what? Social Security is enacted. What's going to happen with Social Security? It's going to be there for you guys when you retire, and you're going to have all this wonderful stuff, and you're going to be able to live. That would have been great, except for somebody took us off the gold standard completely. Remember who Nixon did that. Ford and Nixon did that. Really, guys? Now what happens? Now a car, instead of costing $1,000, is costing $10,000. It's like, wait a minute, what happened here? They made those decisions here. And now watch it impact. Now we're just talking about the history. We haven't even got into the spiritual stuff yet. 41. You have Hitler attacking the USSR, Russia. 42, you have the U.S. halts. They interned the Japanese Americans in 42, put them in concentration camps all over the country. We got one down south down here somewhere. Why would you do that? Because over here you've been told what? The sky is falling. The sky is falling. It's all falling apart. Look, we got to come together. We got to have this unity. So what do? We go throw those guys in prison because we need our safety. See? Exactly. 43, Italy is invaded by Germany. The tide is beginning to turn against the Axis. We got by the way, the Allies, they're established from the very beginning, so are the Axis, and so forth. 44, France is invaded. The bombing of Japan begins in 44. Now, we're not involved yet, but we're what? We're helping out. We're getting there. The Philippines are liberated. Russia sweeps through the Eastern Europe. 45. Well, let's see. Pearl Harbor was in 41. Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed it. I was going to read. Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. It's right here. I just didn't read it. 45, FDR dies. Germany surrenders. The atom bomb is dropped. The end of World War II. Boom. Now we're moving into spring, 1946. The Iron Curtain speech is given now in 46. Our relationships with Russia and Stalin and Lenin and all those guys is bad. Thumbs down. 47, the Cold War begins. By the way, it ends in the history books when the wall goes down under Reagan. Last almost 40 years that goofy thing was going on. 1948 to 49, you have the Berlin airlift. You have the Taft-Hartley deal. 49, you have NATO established. And you have communist control of China. 1950, the Korean War starts. 51, the 22nd Amendment limiting the president to 2 terms is established. You know why? Because FDR had it for a few years. And they decided that was too much. But when he had it, he was down over here coming through the wintertime and the wars and all the unrest and everything. So it really wasn't a bad thing when you think about it looking back, but it's a good thing that they limit that term. 52, Dwight Eisenhower is elected president. 53, industries agree on a guaranteed annual wage. 1954, Brown versus Brown, Board of Education, Supreme Court strikes down separate but equal. Vietnam gets divided. We're here. Some of the impact of the decisions made here are coming up, beginning to be planted. 55, Montgomery, Alabama, the bus boycott, and you have Martin Luther King Jr. rising. 57, you have the Eisenhower Doctrine. You have the Civil Rights Act. By the way, Civil Rights Act, every Republican voted yes. Democrats all voted no. They don't tell you that in the spin. Okay? You have Sputnik happen. 58, you got the first U.S. satellite and ICBM are up. NASA's established. U.S. occupies Lebanon. 1960, the U-2 shot down over Russia. John F. Kennedy elected president. Nonviolent protest against segregation begins. That's in the spring. It comes from, what did they decide to do over here? Now we're involved in the world's issues, when before we weren't. There's a movement. The last summer, we've come into summertime here. In 61, the 23rd Amendment giving D.C. the right to vote for president. The Peace Corps is established. The Bay of Pigs incident happened. 16,000 troops are sent to Vietnam in a peacekeeping role. 62, University of Mississippi is integrated. The Cuban Missile Crisis is started. 63, the Civil Rights March on Washington. JFK is assassinated. 64, free speech movement at Berkeley. The Beatles. That's all it says, the Beatles. The 24th Amendment outlaws the poll tax, war on poverty, the Gulf of Tonkin incident. 65, the Great Society, Malcolm X is assassinated. Operation Rolling Thunder in Vietnam. It's rolling. 66, you've got the NOW, N-O-W, formed. National Organization of Women, formed. France withdraws from NATO. Black Power. 67, Detroit riots happen. 68, Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King are murdered. In Vietnam, you got the Tet Offensive. Johnson won't seek re-election. Nixon is elected president. That's here. The decision-making process is established over here. We're reaping what we sow. 70, you've got the massacre at Kent State. The EPA is established. Cambodia invasion creates anti-war turbulence because now we got into Cambodia somehow. 1971, Nixon opens talks with China. Wage price controls is established. The Pentagon Papers are published. Remember what those were. 72, intensive bombing of North Vietnam. Watergate, Nixon reelected, then you got Watergate. 73, you got the ceasefire in Vietnam. Spiro Agnew resigns, U.S. forces withdraw. 74, the Watergate tapes show up. Nixon resigns, Ford pardons him. But what happens in 74? Where's inflation now? It's at 20, 25%. I can remember my dad, we were looking at buying a house in the mid-70s, and the mortgage rate was 15%. That was in Alabama. Yeah. We moved to Chicago in 79, and the interest rates were more than that. You know? And everybody was, the interest rate. Now interest rates are what, 3? 2, 3, 4%? I got 4% on our home. You know, it's like, holy cow. These kids right here, the millennials, I'm talking to Danielle about her loans for her master's degree. And we have her car on a lease agreement right now. And we're trying to figure out what she wants to do with that. And I keep talking to her about the interest rate. What's the interest rate going to be? And she's, what is that? And I'm like, what do you mean, what is that? So I got to teach her. But they don't worry about that because they don't buy the property because of the process. They go rent, you know. Now Ricky and Danielle watch the interest rates because I had to do this with Ricky in his vehicle. Now they're like, Dad, 10%? I go, yeah, but honey, look at what the credit union gives you. And it's like 4%. I said, which one do you want to pay? Well, yeah, the 4. I go, there you go, you know. But so what are we running into? Kids who have no idea about that. Follow that? That's my point here. 75, Vietnam falls. Now, listen to this one. In 1975, 44% of married women work in a workplace outside of the home. What's happened? Economically, what now has happened? Because of going off the gold standard, making those decisions back here with the Federal Reserve and the central banking system, which happens back here, what's going on? Now mom can't stay at home and raise the children, work on the, we're moving from a farming mentality to a industrial mentality and so forth. 76, Carter is elected president. 78, you've got the Camp David Accords, the Panama Canal Treaty is ratified. 79, the American embassy in Iran is occupied. Russia goes back into Afghanistan again. In 80, The U.S. boycotts the Olympics, and Reagan is elected president. That brings us through to here. The last fall, we're getting to us, okay? 80 to 90, according to and that's just how I have it worked out here. In 82, the Equal Rights Amendment dies. CIA organizes the Contra War against Nicaragua's Sandinista government. 83, we have the bombing of the Beirut barracks. 239 U.S. Marines die. What are we beginning to see now? The world saying, we don't want you here, America. Go home. U.S. invades Grenada. Reagan proposes the Star Wars, the Strategic Defense Initiative. 84, Reagan defeats Walter Mondale in a landslide. Congress bars military aid to the Contras. Now that's going to come back here in a little bit, isn't it, with Ollie North. 86, William Rehnquist becomes Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and Antonin Scalia joins the court. The court is now conservative to the majority at every time, no questions asked. 88, Oliver North, John Poindexter, and other Iran-Contra figures are indicted. George W. Bush is elected president. Anthony Kennedy joins the Supreme Court. 89, Oliver North is convicted. You have the Exxon Valdez up in Alaska happen. You have the invasion of Panama, and Noriega withdraws. He's overthrown. The Berlin Wall comes down. 90, Iraq invades Kuwait. That's Gulf War I, which was not a big war. I don't even think it would be considered a war. It was an action or a conflict. But what Gulf War I showed you was how quick a national power can go from no presence to complete presence in an area. Within 6 months, they had every mechanized movement group in our military, all 4 branches, there, like that. It just showed how quick this stuff can move now. David Souter joins the Supreme Court. Germany is reunited. Soviet troops withdraw from Eastern Europe. 1991, again, the Gulf War, Operation Desert Storm. Clarence Thomas joins the Supreme Court. But did he get there easily, or did we have kind of a little issue, didn't we? Do you know that these guys have no clue about that stuff? The millennials? They have no clue about it. That's the first time someone could make an accusation that never be investigated, but it was counted as true. Guilty before proven innocent, rather than innocent to be proven guilty. 92, we have the Supreme Court upholds Roe v. Wade, and Bill Clinton is elected president. 93, Congress approves NAFTA. Ruth Bader Ginsburg joins the Supreme Court. The World Trade Center is bombed. First attempt to bring it down was in 93. I remember that day. We were born in 94, but I remember that we were born. We were married in 94, but I remember that. In 94, Rick and Linda gets married. Oh, I'm sorry. The Republican victory in the midterms, and Stephen Breyer joins the Supreme Court. Clinton is reelected president in 96. 98, we have Monica Lewinsky, and that scandal breaks. Operation Desert Thunder. The House Judiciary Committee sends 4 articles of impeachment against Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton is impeached by the United States House of Representatives. 99, Bill Clinton is acquitted by the United States Senate. 2000, George Bush is elected President of the United States. That gets us through the fall. But do you know what Bill Clinton did to this country spiritually? It made what happened with Monica not sex. That wasn't sex. That wasn't an intimate relationship that's supposed to be between a husband and a wife. That was just something else. But what did it do? It set an undercurrent to the sexual revolution, which had died off back here in the last go-around, but was restarted there. See, Billy Boy, Mr. President, he's born up here. What did he grow up in? The sexual revolution. So what does he think's okay? But he introduced it to the whole nation on TV. Well, I didn't have, see? So now you have kids who are my generation watching that going, well, cool, I can go do that. I don't get in trouble. So what do you have? You have this shifting going on. 2000 to the present, you have 9/11, the World Trade Center is bombed, comes down. You have the first African-American president elected, and Barack Hussein Obama, which, by the way, is an interesting thing, just kind of a side commentary on observation. We have 9/11. They take the buildings down. 3,000 plus are dead. George Bush Jr. goes and bombs Afghanistan, gets us back in Iraq against the Muslims, against the Islamic radicals. We go and elect a guy that's got Hussein as a middle name, and yet America is racist. If you listen to today's, it's like, wait a minute, what? What did 9/11 do? It changed America. It put a flag on every doorstep again. It put it right back to what? World War II, coalescing together. But that only lasted until the politics began to shift. And obviously there's more to come on all that. Okay? So that's the history. These guys, the millennials that we deal with predominantly, they do not know about or understand the implications of the Bill Clinton-Monica Lewinsky event. In the last election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, CNN, USA, World News, ABC, NBC, one of those guys did a poll of the young people. And on the poll, one of the questions was about the Bill and Monica event. And it was something like 80% of them said he ought to have been kicked out of office and put in jail. And then the reporters that were of that age, of the millennial age, that were interviewing, because Trump brought the ladies to the meeting, to the debate that time, they were talking about that, and the kid reporters, the millennial reporters, they had no clue about the details. They had to go Google it and YouTube it and find it and figure out. And they were so mad that the president would do that and that Hillary stood by him. Well, Hillary's born over here, and what happens? You stand by your man. These guys are like, you kick him to the curb. So what is going to happen when these guys start getting married? Divorce rates are going to go up. You're not going to have marriage. Marriage gets redefined. So, Yeah, it's already redefined, sorry. So off you go, okay? Now we need another break, but I got one more set of history to do with you, if you're okay. You need a break, or are we okay? Let me stop the tape. Take 5 minutes, so we don't run long on the tape.